This is the first of two PowerPoints this week for week 2. The first one is about the research process and the different components in that process. So let's begin. There are several phases in the research process, and the first phase is what we're about to start this week. This is called the problem formulation. This is where we create our research question, our hypothesis, we decide what variables, how we're going to define everything in our project, and we do our literature review. Phase 2 is where you actually design the study. So phase 1, you're thinking about it, you're coming up with all of your ideas, and phase 2, you're designing the study. You have to select what methods you're going to use, and you have to determine how you're going to collect your data. Will you do surveys? Will you do focus groups? Will you do observations? We have to figure out the answers to those questions. Phase 3 is where then you actually go and do it. You collect that data. Whatever you decided to do, you go out and do it and collect your data. And then phase 4 is where you take your data and you process it. And that means if you're doing quantitative studies, you're going to put it all in a computer. If you're doing qualitative, you're going to classify it and code it. And don't worry, we're going to go over all of this throughout the year, so throughout the semester. So this will make more sense later as we go along. Phase 5 is where you analyze your data. You come up with your different themes, you run your statistics. Phase 6 is where you interpret what you found. So we have some statistic, now we have to say, what does that mean? Or we have some themes, we have to say, what does that mean? And then the last phase is where you write up a report and you share what you learned with other people. So in phase 1, you have to get down to creating a research question, and we're going to do that this week. So research questions should be narrow and specific. You want to narrow it down to some specific thing you want to know. We don't want to say something really broad that will take us forever to find out. We need to narrow it down so we can actually do it. It has to be posed in a way that can be answered by observation. So we want to be able to see the answer. We want to be able to find the answer in some data. It isn't something that it has to be answerable. Okay, so it needs to be something we can answer, and most importantly, it has to have significance to social work. We don't do research for research purposes. We do research to help people, to answer questions so that we can help people, so that we can solve problems and make life better for other people. There can't just be one true answer. So for example, a research question isn't how many people are in the Crescent City Detention Center, because that's just one true answer. We can call them up and find that out. That's not a research question. Okay. And also a research question has to be feasible. We have to actually be able to do it. So for example, we can't say how many people like to wear blue on Thursdays in the United States. We could never be able to get the answer to that. We couldn't ask everybody at the same time. We couldn't find all those people and be able to answer that. So it has to be something that you can actually accomplish. Unit of analysis. When we're looking at a research question, we want to know what unit of analysis are we asking. So if we want to know about prisoners in a detention center, and we want to know about the individual people, that's the individual level. Okay? So our example on the PowerPoint is, if we want to compare scores of children in a classroom, we're looking at the individual unit of analysis. If we want to compare the averages of scores for two different classrooms, we're looking at a group level of analysis. If we want to compare scores for America and China, then that's a society level of analysis. Now, why is this important? This is important because you cannot compare your results from one unit of analysis to another. And I'll show you that on the next slide. So, it would be erroneous to draw conclusions about individuals based on a group observation. For example, we have two cities. We have City A and we have City B. City A has a low crime rate, and it also has a low population of infants. So there's not very many babies in City A. City B has a high crime rate, and they have a lot of babies in their city. For some reason, it attracts people, young families with babies. So we cannot conclude that infants are more likely to commit crimes. Do you understand that? So just because City A has lower crime and lower infants, and City B has higher crime and higher infants, we can't make an individual conclusion about a group. Okay? So we can't say infants are more likely to commit crimes based on this group observation. So you need to figure out when you're looking at in your groups, when you're figuring out what your research question is, you need to look at it and say, what unit of analysis are we looking at? Because that determines what we can draw conclusions about. Okay, here's another example. City A voted in a Republican mayor. They also have a high population of retired people. City B voted in a Democrat mayor, and they have a low population of retired people. Once again, these are two different cities, so they're group observations. We cannot conclude that retired people vote Republican. We actually don't know if any retired people voted at all, because we didn't look and see how individual people voted. We didn't look and see how retired people voted versus working people. What we looked at was city data, group data. So we can only say things about the city, not about the people in the city. Okay? So we can say the city has voted Republican. We cannot say retired people vote Republican. Okay? If we wanted to know if retired people vote Republican, we'd have to survey retired people and ask them how they voted. Conceptualization. Conceptualization is the mental process of making vague and abstract ideas more precise. And when you get your research question, we need to figure out what are the concepts in your research question. So think of concepts as mental images that symbolize ideas. In your research question, so in my dissertation, my research question was, I have to remember my research question. I wanted to know what are the characteristics of foster families that create placement stability for foster children. So my concepts are foster families. So what does that mean? What is a foster family? Foster children. What are foster children? That's a concept. And then another concept was placement stability. What does placement stability mean? So you look at your research question and you divide it up and say, what are the concepts in my research question? Then we have to operationalize them, and that means define them. Okay? So when we operationalize something, we're defining the concepts. And that helps us create variables. So how do you symbolize your concepts? So placement stability is a concept. And it has been operationalized or defined. In my study, I decided a child had placement stability if they had 2 or less foster care placements. So foster care placement is, when a home that they go to live in when they can't live with their parents. So I decided that if over a period of time a child had 2 or less of those homes, then they had achieved placement stability. So you guys have to define your concepts in your research question. So you want to think about that and spend some time as a group doing that. So there's lots of ways to operationalize. We can do self-reports. We can ask people questions. We can do direct observations. We can watch people. You can look at available records. So in my dissertation, when I did my study for my PhD, I looked at available records. I looked at the county data. I used a database that had been put together, and it was county level data and individual foster families and foster children. So what will you use to operationalize your research question? Now, not all studies will have a hypothesis. If you're doing exploratory studies, you won't have a hypothesis. If you're doing a descriptive study, if you just want to find out what the characteristics of something are, you won't have a hypothesis. A hypothesis is a statement that predicts the relationship between two variables. So it says, I think that this is how the relationship between these two things is. It should be clear and specific. It should have more than one outcome. You want to make sure it's value-free, and it has to be testable. And you also want to say usually which direction the relationship is. So you may say, our group hypothesized that foster families with more education have more placement stability for the children that live in them. So you see how I thought that one thing affected another. That's the relationship. So I said that education of foster families affects placement stability. And I also gave it a direction. I said foster families with more education have more placement stability. So I gave it a direction. I could have said foster families with more education have less placement stability, but I didn't think that was possible. So that wasn't my hypothesis. And that's the end of that slide.